Friends, my name is Madhulika Kaushik and I work for the Commonwealth of Learning. I would like to welcome you to this session on open education resources and licensing issues. By this time, you're familiar with what OERs are, what is their usage in higher education, and what are the implications for learners, creators of content, and teachers, as well as the trends that you may have over the past few days been witnessing in the usage of open education resources. Today we are going to talk about copyright and open education resources. Some of you might say, if these are open and free, why do we have to worry about copyright at all? Now, copyright and licensing are important in open education resources because these issues have permeated the discussion and debate in the creation and use on and reuse of open education resources, which is why these issues are at the heart of open education resources, because these have important implications for people who create open education resources, people who use them, and people who mainstream their usage as institutional material and resources. By default, if there is nothing given on a content, if there's nothing mentioned on a content, copyright is by default. Therefore, when you use material from online resources, you use material from the internet, or you use material from a published resource, copyright is automatically implied, and therefore you must always believe that there is an all rights reserve kind of a issue there, and therefore whenever you use such material, permission is always required if you want to use this published work or work published on the internet, unless it is clearly mentioned that this is available for use without copyright. What is a copyright? How do we define a copyright? I'm sure being educators and being people who have been in the area of research and teaching, you're very familiar with copyright. But just to put things in perspective, and especially in the context of OER, as we'll be using them later, a copyright is a exclusive right. It's a collection of exclusive rights, and it is given to people who create an original material or an author so that their original work can be protected. They can lay a claim to their original work and their intellectual property can be protected. So when a person gets a copyright, he gets the exclusive right to control the publication of his work, distribution and adaptation of his work for a certain period of time. Copyright is given for a particular period of time, and this varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Different countries have different kind of jurisdictions that they kind of time period that they allow, and after which time that particular work enters the public domain and is available for people to use. Why do people need a copyright? It is regarded as an incentive for people to create original work, to do innovative work, and to allow them to have credit for their originality and creativity. Also, if others are using their work for royalty, this is also becomes a matter of financial compensation for the creativity or creation that they have made available. What does copyright really mean? A copyright means that all rights to the material are reserved. Any other user other than the original author may not reproduce the material without permission. However, fair use for or fair dealing for classroom usage is allowed. Fair usage in the sense if you're quoting a few lines with attribution, it can be allowed. For all other usage, for all other reproduction and so on, permission may be required. A written permission may be required from the copyright holder. It could be the publisher or the author. And at times, royalty payments for reproduction are required. All those who are in the business education field or engineering education field, case studies, whenever you utilize case studies, you have to give royalty payments to people and buy cases for reproduction and use. Similarly, if you're using this copyrighted material, you may not be able to use it on the internet because then nobody can control the distribution. So these are some of the implications of copyright as far as resources, written resources or educational resources are concerned. For the open education resources, what has been created is the facilitation of a Creative Commons license. And here is the link for you to go and visit this site. In fact, I would encourage all of you to at least go to this site and look at what different kinds of licenses are in use and what is the rationale behind developing this kind of a license regime. It is, while there are other kinds of licenses that can be associated with open education resources, the Creative Commons is the most developed alternative licensing approach that has been utilized, and it is the commonest form of license that is applied to open education resources. It is a user-friendly license and applied for all digital resources. So what are these licenses? To elaborate for them, some people feel that they are an alternative to a copyright. It is not so. They are not an alternative to a copyright. They ride on a copyright in the sense that the creator of the material has a copyright and then chooses to release it under a Creative Commons license. So they enable creators to distribute their content to a wide variety of audience, or just make it free for anyone who wants to use them. And they can specify the manner in which they can allow the usage of the material. So you would, as we go ahead, you would see these are different kind of Creative Commons licenses, and there are terms that you can add to the basic terms that are there, so that you can specify the terms under which reuse, adaptation, repurposing, contextualizing of the material is allowed. Creative Commons licenses aim to make the copyright content more active by making it freely available to people. However, there may be some kind of terms that shape the way in which the usage can be made. And why has this particular regime of licensing been utilized or been created? Is because once the content is created and the intention is to share it widely, there should be facilitation available in order to make people access this material freely, use it freely, adapt it freely, without worrying about writing for copyright permissions and so on. At the same time, the original creator should be able to get credit for his work, and therefore this is how the Creative Commons license have been designed. Let us look at what these licenses mean and what are the implications of using these licenses. All Creative Commons license, or all CC licenses or Creative Commons licenses as we call them, have certain common features, and these common features are basic terms under which the licenses are given. For example, and these are the terms that I would explain, is that all Creative Commons licenses, whatever kind of licenses they may be, they enable the creators and licensors retain the copyright to their own material, while allowing others to copy, distribute, reuse, repurpose the material, at least non-commercially. There may be some commercial usage allowed, and we'll look at it when we come to that stage. They also ensure licensors get credit for their work, because in all these licenses, attribution is a necessary term, that you need to attribute from where the material has been taken. These are valid across the world. These licenses are not limited to certain jurisdictions, so wherever you are, you can use these licenses, and they are applicable as long as the basic copyright on which they ride lasts. And as I said in the beginning of this slide, that these common features are the basic features or baseline features of all kinds of Creative Commons licenses, and the licensors can choose to add whatever terms they want to on top of these three basic features. This is a sort of a summary sheet of what are the different conditions that can be there, and you would note, and by the time this session is over, you would become very familiar with some of the terms that we use in Creative Commons licenses. And therefore, the first one, the left side shows the condition and the explanation is given on the right. The first condition of all kinds of licenses is attribution. You have to attribute from where is the material taken, or who is this material written by or created by. So the first condition is that of attribution, which says all CC licenses make it compulsory for people to acknowledge and attribute the work to the original creator. Therefore, they must reference the work and if you are the creator, they must give you credit for it. In the way you request, you can create the conditions under which attribution should be given, but it also means that their usage of your work or their attribution of your work does not necessarily mean that you endorse their work. You are citing that work as a reference, and you are making sure that the person who created the work got credit for the work. The second condition is an NC condition, which is non-commercial. That means if you have created the work, you will let other people copy that work, distribute that work, display that work, as long as they are making a non-commercial usage of the work. The work is not being used for in an advertising copy so that commercial use can be made, or is being made use as a training program where people are. So while the resources are there, they can be made use of, but cannot be exploited commercially by people. A third condition is an ND condition, which is a non-derivative work, where if you have created some work, you let others copy it, distribute it in as many numbers as possible, as the others like, as long as they don't make any changes to the material. That means the material has to be distributed as such. There cannot be any derivatives that can be made out of that material. So there cannot be any adaptation, there cannot be any changes, there can be no contextualization. So this is a sort of a limited open education. This is a sort of a license that limits the scope of a usage of an open education resource. Share alike is a very widely open license, which says once you've created a material and you are putting it in the Creative Commons domain, which has got an SA condition, which means share alike condition, you let others copy, distribute, display, perform, modify their work, as long as whatever they create as a modified work, they also share it alike with other people. That means they spread the goodness around, in the sense that they have taken advantage of, made use of your work and created a derivative out of that material. But here, the courtesy of a share alike license demands that you share it alike with other people. So you also release the people who have created this derivative also need to release it under an SA license. So their work would also have to be such that can be copied, distributed, displayed by others, but the third set of people would also have to have an SA license. What does this really mean? The implication of this is that you're creating a whole wave of derivatives where people who keep on modifying this work also share it alike with other people, who then create another derivative. And so while people may not be able to create a whole new resource by themselves, they can always repurpose other resources for their own context, which then becomes a resource for others. So the creativity or the creation of resources gets a boost, and more resources are created for more people to use. Okay. What we will now do is we will look at each of these licenses, and I will try to give you examples of each of these so that you are very clear as to what are the implications of usage of each kind of license. In the earlier session, my colleagues would have taken you through the various kind of open education resources that are available. This particular session lets you understand what are the kind of resources you can use if your purpose is directed in a particular way. For example, if you want to modify certain resources, obviously you cannot use the ND license. So let us look at each of these licenses and try to understand what each implies and what are the, and therefore to yourself, I would like you to, as you're going through, like you to extrapolate and see what are the kind of freedoms a particular license allows you, and therefore if there is a certain OER with a certain kind of license, what applications can you make of that particular OER. So we'll do it one by one. I would also let you, I would ask you to also focus on the kind of icon that is used with that particular license and try to understand some of these. In this particular license, which is a CC BY license, this is the widest possible license, which as is explained here, it is a CC by attribution, in the sense it merely asks you to attribute the author and give him or give a proper reference, acknowledging that the work has been taken from X, Y resource. This license lets others distribute, remix, tweak, means change, and build upon your work. I'm looking at you as the creator of the work, and therefore build upon your work even commercially, because you have not used the word NC there. This license only says CC BY. As long as the original author is credited for the work. This is, as I said, the most accommodating of all licenses, because it just asks for attribution, just let the credit be given to the person who created. But whatever use you want to make, you can make use of. You can make whatever the use of that resource. Therefore, whenever if you've created a work and you want a maximum dissemination of your own licensed work, you should use this license. Look at the icon there. It just has a figure of a person showing the original creator and says by, and you have a double C there under a circle. So it's Creative Commons by attribution license. These are important because these are the figures that would be used to denote on the work that has been created the kind of license that is being used. Okay. The next level, CC BY SA, that means this BY is still there, which means an attribution is required, but there is an added term there which says CC BY SA, attribution and share alike. So you have a CC logo, you have the person logo which is BY, and you have an inverted circle, means you go back and share it alike with other people. So spread the goodness around. The first term is exactly the same in the sense, if you have created the work, you would let others remix, tweak, change, adapt, build upon your work, even for commercial purposes, as long as the credit is given to you and the person who's creating a modified work or creating a derivative agrees to license their new creation under identical terms. That for their work also carries a CC BY SA license. To use a term lightly, in the sense, instead of a copyright where there is an all rights reserved, this is a copyleft, which means free and open source software kind of a license where everyone is allowed to use, and then let a different group of people or other group of people who are interested in these in this copyleft material also utilize this material. Therefore, any work that you have created is the original work, and there are other derivatives that are based on your work. All those derivatives would have to carry a SA license, and therefore they would also allow commercial use, because we are not using the word ND there. Wikipedia uses this license here, so it is a CC BY SA license. So the material that is there can be used and would have to be shared alike. All derivatives that are used will also be used in the same way. Okay, let us look at some other kinds of licenses. We are talking about the third license now, which is attribution with no derivative. That means it would still use the CC BY, but there is a circle there with an equal sign which says non-derivative. That means the work would have to be produced as such, as was the original work. Nobody can make any changes or make any derivatives out of it, cannot modify the work, cannot adapt the work. You are allowed to use, reuse, distribute, as long as you reproduce the work as such. So allows for distribution, commercial and non-commercial, as long as the material is passed unchanged and in whole with proper attribution to the original creator of the work. A slightly more restrictive license is the next one, which is attribution non-commercial, which says CC BY NC, which says this license also allows you to remix, tweak and build upon the work, but only as far as the material is being used non-commercially. The resources are being used for non-commercial purposes. Therefore, whatever derivatives are there would also be a BY license, that is, they will have to attribute you and would also have to make non-commercial use of that material. NC example, all material by the UK Open University is used as a CC NC material, where The use of the material is allowed, remixing is allowed, redistribution is allowed, but the material can only be used for non-commercial, educational kind of purposes. Okay, I would now go to the next example, which is the license CC by NC/ND, which means a Creative Commons license by means attribution. It's a non-commercial license, and it is also a non-derivative license. Now, all material that is published by the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, is this kind of a license where the material is available free of charge. You can use it. You can only make a non-commercial use of it. That means no profits can be earned out of that material, and you cannot edit the material, you cannot change the material, you cannot remix it, you cannot even update it. So the material would have to be used as such. Okay, this particular license shows some mixing of terms that we have talked about earlier. So this license CC, non-commercial share alike, where there is a CC by figure, a non-commercial where there is a dollar sign and a cross against it, it's been crossed out, and the material, the derivative would have to be shared alike, which merely says that this license allows you to remix the material or the education resource, tweak it, build upon somebody else's work non-commercially, as long as the attribution is done and the new derivatives are released under the same identical terms, which means an attribution, a non-commercial usage, and a share alike term is added to the basic term that is there. We just talked about this license already when we were talking about the WIPO example, where only a non-commercial and a non-derivative work usage can be allowed. Okay. A far more liberal license is also, there is a tool. It's not really described as a license, but a tool which is called the public domain tool, and the icon merely says circle within which there is an oval which is crossed out and says PD, public domain. This enables authors and creators of resources to just put their work in the public domain, and this is a situation where they don't even want an attribution to their name, where as opposed to the copyright which says all rights reserved, this particular tool allows authors to have what is called no rights reserved. It's a CCO tool. There is no right, allows licensors to waive all rights. They have the copyright, they waive all copyright and allow what is called a public domain usage of the material. So they place the work in the public domain. This particular mark identifies a work that is free of all copyright restrictions. Anybody can make whatever use of the material, mix it, tweak it, adapt it, adopt it, modify it, repurpose it, contextualize it, and use it. And therefore, if you want that your work could be or may be used in domains that are restricted by some kind of copyright, this particular tool should not be applied, because this enables a completely copyright-free usage of the material. Okay, this is slightly technical in the sense, when you are looking at a particular Creative Commons license or work, sometimes you would find that there is a reference to a ported license or an unported license. This is the legal code that is associated with a particular license. A ported license applies to the adaptation of data to suit a particular technology or a jurisdiction, so these licenses would allow the backup data to be used only under certain jurisdiction, and unported licenses are not associated with any specific jurisdiction and can be used more freely. Okay, when you create your own material, how do you, when we say you want a copyright, you have to register a copyright and so on. In case of Creative Commons, because we are looking at creation of resources that can be freely utilized, there isn't a formal requirement for you to register your resource as under a particular Creative Commons license. What you do is once you create a particular work and you identify the license under which, for example, you want to just use a CC BY license, or you want to use a CC BY SA license, or you want to use a CC BY SA license, which cannot be used, the content cannot be used commercially, so you would say CC BY SA by NC, or CC BY SA NC, non-commercial. So you put those terms, use the relevant icon, give a link to that particular license on the work, and display the license information on your work, right? So when you're releasing it in the public domain, this would get, releasing it as an open education resource with the correct license there, it would be picked up by the registry and would get included in the registry of open education resources. However, it may be a good idea to clearly say what are the rights that you want to be associated with that material, especially if there are if the third parties produce content using this material, what are the terms that you want to specify? For example, if you want to limit in, or you want to specify the conditions under which the subsequent use and reuse by third parties will be made, if you can specify some of those, that will be much more valuable for the users of your material. For example, if your own work contains a third-party copyright, for example, it contains references to tables or pictures or materials that are created by somebody else and you've used them in your material with proper reference, however, and now you want to release your material as an open education resource, the original creators of those tables or pictures or figures may or may not have intended them to be used as open education resources. So while they allowed you to use your material as print or for your own course material, they may have objections to that being those inputs being used as open education resources. So before you release your own work containing these third-party copyrighted materials as an OER, you must undergo a copyright clearance, or you must obtain permission from the original authors or holders of the copyright to clear this third-party clearance, and then only then can you release that material as an open education resource. When you are creating your own material and you want to release it under a particular Creative Commons license, you want to when you are in the as a result of this particular course, we sincerely believe that all of you would try to create some open education resources. So when you create these open education resources, what is the information you need to include there in order to have clear information for people who subsequently want to utilize that material? This is the information that goes. You need to identify the Creative Commons license with hyperlink to that particular license, the name of the copyright holder and the year of publication, the name of the author. Please remember, the name of the copyright holder may not be the same as the author. You may be the author, your institution may hold the copyright of the material that you have created for the institution. Therefore, be clear. So you need to, if the copyright holder is the same as the author, you don't need to repeat it, but if it is not, then you need to have both names. If there is a branding of the institution that needs to be utilized, or any other people who have funded this particular material and therefore would like their credit to be reflected, that information may be there. All those people who have contributed to this material, and as I just said when I was explaining the previous slide, the list of all third-party clearances that you have obtained that fit with proper references given. How do you want this OER to be cited? What is the citation? If it is to be cited by other works, how do you want it to be cited? And if there is all this information that is being given for this OER, who is the general contact person? Is it, if you are 2 or 3 authors, which one? Or if you want to designate a particular administrative person who can be contacted in relation to rights for this, give that information. I'll just like to summarize this. From a left to right, you have the least restrictive Creative Commons tools or licenses to the most restrictive. Obviously, at the least restrictive end is the public domain, where, as I said, it is free of all known copyright restrictions, so there are no copyright restrictions there. People who create material and put it in the public domain do not even insist on attribution. So this is the most free, least restrictive of all licenses. So that is a public domain license. And then you have the CC licenses. CC BY is, as I said, the most flexible and the most generous of all licenses, where the creator of the material only needs an attribution. I mean, this license requires all kinds, requires that merely by providing attribution to the person who created the original resource, you enable the reusers to use the material in or resource in whatever way, remixing, adapting, adding on, creating a derivative, even commercial use. CC BY SA, all kinds of usage allowed and reusage allowed, repurposing allowed, but the only requirement is that any derivatives which are created using this particular kind of license would also have to be licensed under the same terms, therefore would have to carry a CC BY SA license. We move to slightly more restrictive terms as we go towards the right. The CC BY NC license, as we have talked about earlier, all kinds of usage of the material can be made as long as it is a non-commercial usage. So you see the CC icon, you see the person icon attribution, and you see a $ crossed away. So only non-commercial usage can be made. Then you come to the next license, which is CC BY NC SA. So while, like in the previous case, attribution has to be given, only non-commercial use can be made, but the material that is created using this material, that means all derivatives that are created, would also have to be shared alike. So there is a similar licensing requirement imposed on the derivative work. We move to the next license, which is more restrictive, because it says material can be taken, it can be used, it can be reproduced, but only in the original form. Therefore, no changes can be made to the material. So it's a non-derivative license, CC BY ND. And the last is the most restrictive, which says CC BY NC ND. That means the material can be used, attribution is required to be given, only non-commercial usage of the material can be made, and the material can only be used in the original form. You cannot make any adaptation. And the last is what we began with, which is the copyright regime, where it's an all rights reserved. So you have all the 6 CC licenses and the public domain tool. We move from on the left to right, which is a continuum of least restrictive to the most restrictive. When you are creating your own open education resources, please take care to check some of these things. In your own material, is there any copyright of pictures that you may have used? Please remember, in this day of what is called abundance of material in online resources, we sometimes tend to believe that images are free, or something that I can find on a cool picture, a good graphic that I found on the internet is available for use if I've tweaked it a little and changed it to my own requirement. These are all copyrighted items. So if there are pictures that you have used, if there are graphics that you have used, and text that you have used, which do not carry any of the CC domains or a public domain notation there, it means these are materials which are copyrighted. It is always wise to find out and take permission if any of these requirements have been used, because while you may think that I'm creating material for the public good, I'm creating this material for everyone else to utilize, what harm would it do if I've used a picture which I have not created myself? We all need to, as academics and researchers and creators and users of materials, need to respect the rights of other copyright holders. So whatever we have used, whatever usage we've made of somebody else's intellectual property which is copyrighted, we must respect that. And anytime you release an open education resource which has got inputs from other people which are copyrighted, or you've taken it from an online source, please take care to credit that or take permission before you utilize that. I would like to just leave you with some of the references that I've utilized for this session. This is a sort of a mine of information on licenses and issues relating to licenses. So please look at some of these sites and make use of these resources. If you have any questions, I would like you to post them to your course site, and I would be happy to respond to them. And I try to do it as soon as possible. I hope you got some value out of this session. If there are any questions, please do not hesitate to write to me. Thank you.